blockchain ecosystem. So for today, I've got a bunch of slides that I'd like to talk through, but my name's Craig DeWitt. I am a senior director at Ripple. I've been there for about 5 years, building a network on top of the XRP blockchain. I'm founder of a payment company called Payburner that allows peer-to-peer payments over the internet. If you guys have anything to say in the future, particularly anything positive, feel free to reach out. Twitter's the best way to publicly get a hold of me. In terms of my background, I spent some time at Bloomberg working on their products, also at Adobe after the Omniture acquisition. I'm on the US Faster Payments Council, and I currently work at Ripple. For some of the sources that I used on this presentation, and I don't get a commission for these, but I love them so much. David S. Evans' Matchmakers, the New Economics of Multisided Platforms, awesome book for actually building networks and understanding the multi-sided aspects of kind of these new marketplaces. The other piece, Benchmark GP, Sarah Tavel, she has a Medium piece on the hierarchy of marketplaces. I use one of her slides, just awesome, awesome presentation as well. You can see on the right-hand side, I think we got a lot of cool examples that we can talk to today that we can leverage for really understanding how to build networks, and then use a lot of those takeaways for what are the competitive advantages that blockchain delivers that can allow you to build your own networks and scale them. So I thought the best place to start here would be the biggest or the highest level thought of what a network is. And then from there, we can move into what it takes to build the platform that powers that network, apply blockchain, and then talk about what it actually takes to bootstrap a network. So starting at the top of the funnel in terms of when you can get things really right. And that's really what I think of as an ecosystem. And when I think of what an ecosystem is, it's really this complex and interconnected system of various networks and participants that all come together within a single environment. Now, in my picture, that environment's the actual environment, but in our case, we're really talking about digital environments. And when I think about the most successful ecosystems, they really become platforms for platforms. And a couple that really come to mind there are some of the most valuable companies in the world right now, like Amazon is really a platform for platforms in many senses. Facebook and Visa. And another way to look at Bitcoin is really, again, a platform for multiple platforms to be used. And we'll talk about exactly what it is that makes Bitcoin and these other digital assets and blockchain special that you can leverage when building out your platforms or your networks. But these are incredibly, incredibly valuable. They're hard to get going, but they're incredibly valuable when you actually get them up and running and you get those positive network effects. So that would be worth talking about what the network effects are and why these companies are just so darn valuable. Using that value is really a proxy for the amount of value they deliver to the market. And what they all have in common is they benefit from what's called the network effect. And the network effect is where a product or a service gets more additional value as more people use it. And if you can find a business with those kind of capabilities, it can become incredibly valuable. And one way of calculating that value is through what's called Metcalfe's law, which is something that, at least in the digital asset space, we talk about a lot. And that is, you can come up with the value of your network by looking at the proportion of the square of the nodes in the network. And this is just another way of really talking about that network effect, albeit a little academically. So I thought an example would really nail this home, where it is, the first telephone, and back in the early days when we were kind of starting one of the first enterprise financial payments networks on blockchain, selling that first telephone is really hard because when there's nobody on the other side, there's not a ton of value to sell to folks. And that's a big hurdle. And we're going to talk really about this hurdle today, this bootstrapping hurdle of getting the network up and running. The second piece of this is really the tipping hurdle, where things become substantially more valuable when you get to a certain n number of customers, to where there's actually some kind of interaction that can happen between the multiple participants. That's really what we refer to as the tipping point of the network, which requires a different type of strategy than just the kickstarting. And then finally, the massive value is when you kind of get to the domination stage of the winner take all aspects of network effects, because they create these one-sided, essentially monopolies when a marketplace gets it right, because they attract all the participants of that network in kind of a black hole of success in a good way. I thought one thing really interesting is that some research has shown over the last 23 years in the tech industry, 70% of the value creation has actually come from these network effects. And they were using this as a proxy for shareholder value through market cap. But I thought it was really interesting is that technology's success in terms of financial perspective, a lot of that is driven not just by great user experiences by themselves, which as a product manager, I care a lot about and I focus on, but these business and ecosystem and networks models that allow users to benefit from interacting with other users directly. So that's really what I'm exploring here today. And I thought we could start off with what it takes to actually build one of these networks. And the objective of a network business, at least at a high level, is to really reduce the friction by facilitating the exchange between two or more independent groups. So being able to connect different participants in a way that is much more frictionless than what was previously available before you started this business. And the way I look at that is you're just trying to connect at the simplest level participant A, which is one type of participant, with a participant B who's a different type of participant. And the green line, the green arrow behind these, how you connect these is really the product that is built to the market. And this is really where I think the platform comes into play, because we need to build this in a way where we're cognizant of the fact that we want to build this to where this platform scales and allows us to benefit from these network effects by not just reducing friction between two participants, but really reducing friction at scale and between a number of participants that even at the time of building the network, you may not even know exists. So this is really what we want to work towards when really designing what that platform is. And it's the platform that folks really usually think of when they think of product, because it's really the technical aspect and the work between a product manager and an engineering manager to create this awesome experience. What we'll see also is that when you're building a network, your product management has to go much further than that. And you have to really think about the mix of the participants using the platform, which is kind of an N squared type problem to deal with, but it's a lot of fun if you can start getting it right. So let's focus just on this platform piece to start, because that's really building your engine first. What the platform does is it's really the embodiment of what you're trying to do with your network. And that is you want to be able to use it and leverage it to enable your partnerships at scale by facilitating interactions between n number of participants. There's a couple things to keep in mind when building a platform designed to do this kind of work. And it is, you got to be able to attract different customers by enabling them to interact with each other on attractive terms. The important thing is, in many cases, when you're building these networks, they're not necessarily interacting with you directly, but they're using you or your platform as a conduit to work with each other, whether to exchange information or to buy and sell goods in a classic marketplace type platform. The things to think about here is the members have to see enough value to join this network. And even going beyond that, there has to be enough of those members from each group to see the value to join. I used to use dating websites as the example here. For many reasons, I steer clear of that example. I'll use a jobs board. You can have the best user experience in the world on the jobs board, but if you have a bunch of job seekers and no jobs, that's a really inefficient marketplace. That's a really inefficient platform business you're trying to build, despite really getting the tech piece right. So you have this N squared problem where you really have to think about the network participants as part of your product. And the way to think about those network participants is usually at its simplest divided between two groups. One group are your customers. So these are the folks that you are in some way monetizing. Either they're paying for receiving the direct value of the service, or you're monetizing them through serving them ads, but really it's the customers who you monetize and you deliver the service to. The other side of the coin here is that the other members can usually be thought of as partners. So these are folks who in many cases are subsidized to deliver a value or service to your platform so that you can attract those customers, so that you can monetize the platform. And it really becomes this reinforcing cycle of making sure that you have the adequate participants from each side to attract one another and create that reinforcing cycle. A lot of this is academic, so I figured we could use an example that most of us know. And I think you can really look at Facebook as a wildly successful multi-sided platform. What they've been able to do is they have creators as one of their platform verticals. So a creator is really someone who is delivering unique content to the platform that drives others to come and see that. So this could be posting cat photos or what have you. Or in many cases, some of your paid content providers, I don't know, your Kim Kardashians of the world who, have that picture that people want to see. The other side of their marketplace are the consumers. So these are people who these are the masses that really come to Facebook and are consuming the content that is delivered by the creators. Now, you can switch roles on these, but for the examples of this example, it's just easier to think about these in two distinct groups. Now, what Facebook has done is they've created a platform that brings the content creators with the consumers together. And the way that they monetize that interaction is they surface ads. So they have a business aspect, which is the other third aspect of their multi-sided platform. At its simplest, the business is more complex than this, but this is really the three-sided, multi-sided marketplace that allows them to monetize a platform of bringing together different participants through an excellent technical platform that has a great user experience. The creators are really their partners. It's part of the Facebook product. Their consumers who are brought to this, the eyeballs that are coming to the site, who consume the content, those are really their customers. And the third leg is really the monetization, the business side through the ads is really the monetization side. Now, it seems basic, but I can tell you from working on these kind of networks for a while now and trying to bootstrap them, is once you can segment your participants into these three groups, partners, customers versus monetization, building out experiences and orienting your business and product roadmap and strategy becomes a lot easier to manage rather than just thinking of this plethora of folks who are coming to your product. Now we can talk about something I am really excited about, and that is the applicability of blockchain. So blockchain is one of those beautiful buzzwords that gets thrown around a lot. And if you ever get cornered at a cocktail party, which I do when people find out I work in the space, usually you need a quick definition of what a blockchain is. And here's my gift to you. Here's your cocktail party definition. All blockchain is, it's a tool or a technology that allows truth without a central authority. That's it. Really simple. So there's truth without having a central arbiter of truth on a network. And it does that through a lot of technical stuff, but it's not super important for building products on, believe it or not. What this allows is it allows excellent peer-to-peer interactions without that third-party arbiter, which means that you can do things on a peer-to-peer basis that are cheaper in other cases because you don't necessarily have to pay a middleman. Now, there are some serious drawbacks to blockchain technology. It's a relatively inefficient database in terms of cost and speed. And for the folks on product who really like to build out new functionalities and offer new use cases to the market, it's incredibly difficult to scale and add new functionality to. And a reason is there's no central authority, so there's no central party that gets to enforce what features or versions or functions are available on the network. So you really have this, think of it as really like this static technology that really allows truth without central authority. A lot of people talk about a lot of different use cases for this. Everything that I've seen is that the value here is really, it's a platform for value transfer. At its core, it is simply a platform for value transfer, meaning that you have a way of moving value from party A to party B in a truly cost-efficient manner, which means you can do things instantaneously, which means you can do things globally, and which means that you can do things at a much lower cost, which means you can do things like micropayments that have not been previously possible. So some blockchain ecosystems, so platform for platforms really that exist today. Bitcoin, XRP, and Ethereum networks are some of the three that you've probably heard of. And really there's a lot of discussion on these, and there's a lot of people who feel very passionate. I'd say stay away from Twitter when you come across those folks. But it's really just excellent payment infrastructure that serves itself really well to global from day one digital network businesses. And that's the way that I think about it. So going back to our example of connecting participant A with participant B, really blockchain is part of your platform. It's really just infrastructure, and the way that I think about it, just infrastructure that really powers the value transfer. So blockchain really is able to serve well as a value transfer mechanism that you can build an application on top of that has some value added experiences between to the two participants. But you can leverage that blockchain and the digital asset transfer underneath it to power some use cases that are not possible in today's world. So let's go back to the Facebook example. An example, and there's a million things that you can do by changing the payment mechanism, but an example of using the Facebook that we talked about earlier, or the social networking pieces, today Facebook is serving ads as part of their platform. And this is not a statement against Facebook in any capacity. Wildly successful business, incredibly smart people. But there are some problems with the ads business that Facebook is running into. And if you think about just ads in general, is in most cases they actually subtract from the user experience. So what blockchain can enable you to do is it can enable you to remove aspects of the monetization that are detrimental to your experience. And one way to think about this is you could actually build a platform like Facebook that allowed peer-to-peer micropayments between consumers and creators in a way where Facebook was able to monetize that exchange of value over their platform with the digital asset, or release a digital asset that allowed them to monetize these flows in a way where consumers could pay creators directly for seeing their content in fractions of payment. And it'd be interesting to actually see a platform like this. I'm not saying this would be successful at all. Very difficult to overcome Facebook in the winner-take-all platform space. But you can just think through, let your mind wander. If you could do peer-to-peer payments with digital assets for zero cost instantaneously on your platform, is there a future where you don't actually have to surface ads? And that's a lot of the stuff that folks are working through right now. But at its core, you got a payment mechanism that you can now leverage in your businesses that help streamline and supercharge your own networks. So what the blockchain-based payments can do for you is they're really well suited for global marketplaces. They're really well suited for the low value, high volume type value exchange. And by low volume, I mean all the way down to things like fractions of a fraction of a penny. For example, on a couple of music platforms like X Songs, you can buy music for a fraction of a cent. And that's not really something that you can do over today's, cross-border payment mechanisms using fiat currency today or dollars. Blockchain is really well suited to that. And in summary, what I'm saying is blockchain with payments as you're building a network are really well suited to tackle those kind of use cases that just can't be well served by today's infrastructure. And that infrastructure is usually the payments infrastructure that you're able to play with. Because there's much more efficient ways, much more efficient databases, much more efficient everything really for providing other experiences outside of payments with blockchain. So some examples that if this interests you to really look at, Bitcoin.com does some really cool stuff with merchant acceptance of payments using Bitcoin Cash. Ripple doing some really, really cool stuff. This is my own book, so I'm talking my own book, but Ripple does some really cool stuff on the cross-border space, targeting mostly enterprises using the XRP blockchain and digital assets to do so. But you can really look at these and get some ideas of your own for how this could either benefit your network as a payment channel, or if you want to create your own business, leveraging blockchain really as a digital asset payment mechanism. So think of blockchain really as just a tool within your network that you're building. And nobody really sells their networks today saying, hey, guess what? I'm using MS SQL as my database. Yeah, customers aren't really going to care about that very much. Blockchain really sits in the same place. So you can really think about this part as being almost agnostic to whether or not you're using blockchain, although it does apply to businesses that use blockchain, applies to mine as well. There's really 3 steps in the hierarchy of marketplaces. I used some different terms for them earlier, but again, there's a Medium post. I'm using this slide from Sarah Tavel. Awesome to read if you guys get a second. But the first step is really kickstarting, going from 0 to 1. The other steps, although they're extremely interesting, they're actually not as hard as this initial kickstart. So I thought that's where we could focus. There's 2 aspects of really bootstrapping your network and going from that 0 to 1. The first aspect is delivering what is called like your minimum viable happiness. So a lot of people think about in terms of MVP. Well, in terms of the network, when you have more than just the technical product, when you're dealing with different participants, you got to think a little bit bigger in terms of the minimum viable happiness aspect. And the second piece is really getting the mix right of various participants so that participants can match on your network and so that you can start getting the virtuous circles as you move on to the tip phase, which is phase 2. So focusing on number 1, what it really takes to get to that minimum viable happiness. From that presentation, great statement. The marketplace that wins is the marketplace that figures out how to make their buyers and their sellers meaningful, more happier than the substitute. This is fairly in line with what I was saying earlier about decreasing the friction in getting these two participants to interact in some capacity. The way to do this at the broadest level is really not boiling the ocean. Tying back into some of the stuff going on in blockchain right now, if you look at some of the projects, if you look at some of the different either blockchains or projects built on top of blockchains, a big mistake that consistently happens in the industry is that folks try to say they have a million different use cases. And from my perspective, if you come out on day 1 and say you have a million different use cases, you actually have exactly 0, because chances are you're not doing any of them well. So really, step 1, don't boil the ocean. Focus on a use case. Focus on a specified use case that you think you can win. And it doesn't matter how big that use case is, just as long as you can make the initial users meaningfully more happier than the alternative. And this allows you to really build a highly optimized experience for that specified niche. That's your beachhead. That will become your toehold. Once you have happy users who want to talk about your platform in return, then it becomes easier to get the flywheel going to get recurring users. In terms of measuring the minimum viable happiness that you're bringing, product managers, myself included, the first thing that I want to look at is growth numbers. I want to look at transactions. I want to look at new daily users. I want to see the line go up and to the right. But when you're going from 0 to 1, you're playing a different game. And the game is, don't care about growth so much. Really focus on retention of users as a proxy for your happiness. So when folks first come to your platform, if they're bouncing after a first interaction, that's a sign that you probably don't have your minimum viable happiness right yet. You haven't found it yet. Once you get folks who are militantly engaged and love what you're doing, even if it's for a small part of their life of what you're touching, that is really where you can start to grow and establish your beachhead. So that growth is really a second distant factor. That's something really to think about after you get into that phase 2, when you're really starting to scale your network. The last piece of kickstarting is not supposed to be scalable. So I've had a ton of conversations previously with product managers or folks in the business when you're doing something, and folks like to lean back and say, yes, but is it scalable? And the answer is no, it's not scalable. We're trying to go to 0 from 1. That is inherently not scalable. So you might have to do things going from 0 to 1, whether it's the way that you organize, whether it's the incentives that you deliver to your customers, but kickstarting is not supposed to be scalable. So it's just, you got a million things to worry about in product. That's just one that I would not worry about. The last piece is getting the mix right. And this is really elevating some of that product experience and product thought beyond just the actual experience itself, and really starting to manage a network itself. And from the NASA folks who are product folks, engines are really all about the mix. So getting to that network explosion, that network liftoff, that thrust, it's about getting the mix of your network correct once you got your engine, the platform already built. And that comes down to what we talked about before. Be sure you know who your customers are and who your partners are. Again, your customers are the folks coming to the service that you will eventually monetize. Partners are really the ones who you need to actually provide the service. And in many cases, a way to tell this is that out of your customer groups, which is the one that you can actually pay to behave in a way that you want to behave in some kind of fashion. That's usually a way to figure out who your partner is. Customers and partners are usually thought of when building a network as the chicken and the egg problem. What came first, the customers or the partners? This is something that all networks will struggle with in the early days. But getting to that network ignition is really about finding the right mix between these two. the chickens and the eggs. So some of this is really you kind of like bringing them both at the same time. And that's the engine analogy that I'm, overusing here to actually get to what it takes to build your network and actually see that organic growth take off. There's a principle between the types of customers and partners that you have that's really important to keep an eye on, because even in the early days, if you get this wrong, it can be disastrous to growing your network. And it is understanding whether or not you're in the ignition phase or if you're in a fizzle. And once you get into a fizzle, that is not a good place to be. That is a death spiral that is incredibly hard to pull out of. If you look at an x-axis and a y-axis of just a simple graph of the number of participants of each type, there's some minimum required customer ratio to get to the network effects to where participants can match and actually experience value from your platform. If you are above that ratio, if you're able to incentivize or pull in the right customer segment matches, you're in an ignition zone, you're in a growth zone. Your network is doing well, you're adding more parties to it because there's substantial value from all the parties who are involved. If you are under that ratio, if you're not bringing the right mix together, you get into what is called the implosion or the fizzle zone. And that is, if there's a job board and there's only 1 or 2 jobs and it's not super attractive to your customers are going to leave and not come back. And prospective partners who would, maybe post those jobs, they're not going to join a platform that's hemorrhaging users. And so when you're ready to start a networks business, this is one of the reasons why getting it right is so darn hard. But focusing on something that you can actually control here, because this can seem futile and hopeless, is really critical. The best thing that I can suggest when kickstarting, beyond, of course, building that excellent participant experience, is start with your partners. If you have to choose one to start with, if you have to choose the chicken or the egg, I don't know which is which, but the chicken or the egg, start with your partners, because your partners are going to allow you to incentivize them to build the infrastructure. They're going to allow you to work with them in a way where you're going to drive them business. And usually in many cases, you're just paying them to be on your network at first. That can drive your customers, and that actually gives you a fighting chance at the positive reinforcement cycle of customer and sender, or customer and partner. Last thing to think about when kickstarting is it's really the happiness that is key. If you can make these users happy, even at a substantial negative margin, that's still a very attractive business, just as long as you can get capital to do it. Because again, if you get it right, these businesses become incredibly, incredibly valuable. So that is kickstarting businesses, with a look at kickstarting businesses on top of a blockchain as a means of value transfer between networks. And with that, my summary is these networks are super hard, but if you do it, big payday. 2, blockchain is really well suited as a platform for platforms, as a value exchange mechanism for you, especially if you want to build a global marketplace. And 3, when doing this, again, focus on that happiness. Don't worry about scaling. All right, and that is my presentation today. So again, definitely feel free to reach out to me at Twitter, but love to open it up for questions or just broadly have a discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. That was really great and informative. The first question I see here is from Elizabeth Petro, and she said she's an ads monetization PM on a streaming service, and she's thought a lot about how they could use micropayment for content creators instead of serving ads, but they found that most listeners aren't willing to pay at all. She was interested to hear your perspective for those situations.
I think it's a great point. You've seen a lot of networks try to shoehorn in blockchain when there was when the craze happened. And the fact of the matter is, in many cases, many networks are not suited for blockchain, especially some of these free networks like streaming services, for example. I think streaming services for whatever company you're working on probably doesn't make sense. I do think that there's some interesting things with like paid podcasts that might make sense though, for more of that streaming payment type service. So don't take this as saying all marketplaces should move to blockchain for micropayments. I definitely hear you. Most of them actually probably aren't well suited at all for it.
Yeah, and everybody, if you have questions, please use the Q&A function or the chat feature. I have a question, and I'll also say, hearing your story about how everyone corners you at parties to try and talk to you about blockchain or cryptocurrency, and then trying to be able to explain it to them. I mean, after more than 10 years in digital content creation and working for email marketing, my favorite thing is when I go back to visit my parents and my grandmas in Chicago and hearing them try and explain to somebody else what I do for a living. So I empathize with the struggle. And my question was, you know, you talked about the minimum viable happiness, which I love, that idea, and versus the MVP. And I was wondering, how do you balance that with like trying to make your customers happy versus the stakeholders in your company happy as you're getting to product launch?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some of it is structural in that if you're at a company that is really prioritizing, for good reason, short-term returns, and they want to get in, or they want to launch some kind of network-based product, that is going to be incredibly painful. I don't think there's a good way to manage those stakeholders there, because if a business is going to get into this, building a network is, you're most likely going to fail. One. Number two, even if you're not going to fail, it's going to take you a while to get there. So building a networks business is really a long-term play. The way that I would manage stakeholders internally is, before we even jumped into this, really outlining the fact that this is really fraught with, the potential for not, getting in the fizzle zone. And two, it's going to take a while to do. So you're going to have to take a long-term basis look at things.
Awesome. Yeah, we got a couple questions coming in. The first one here is from Anitha Bieberg. They said, I'm building a platform that will use data analytics for monetization. There is value transfer called time credits, but will blockchain prevent that business model?
Great question. I don't, just broadly speaking on that, blockchain won't prevent any business model. I think a lot of people in the blockchain or digital asset space have positioned blockchain as a destroyer or something that could prevent other business models. I don't really think of it that way. I really think of it as an enabler of different or new business models. So your business model sounds great. The streaming service sounds great. I mean, these are incredibly healthy businesses that you don't have to force blockchain into. Blockchain really sits well in places where there is a need for value transfer on a global business, specifically for lower value payment types. And that's really where I see it fitting in. So if blockchain is not applicable to your business at all, don't worry about it.
Awesome. And then Jolie asks, what are some industries and specific businesses that have successfully used blockchain and micropayments, and where are experiments occurring?
Great question. I actually only know of one successful business that's using digital assets in general right now. Right now, where the industry is, it is probably 90+% based on speculation, where people are essentially buying digital assets, driving up the value of digital assets just because they hope that they will make money from those digital assets. I'm talking my own book here because I work at Ripple, so I've said that in the presentation. But Ripple's the only company that I have found so far that has successfully built a network that's leveraging digital assets to provide cheaper cross-border payments to customers, or cheaper, or just any use case actually on top of digital assets. The way that business works is Ripple leverages enterprises, banks around the world, payment providers to make cross-border payments using its tech. And they're able to do so faster and cheaper than today's cross-border payments. Those aren't necessarily micro payments, but in the case of cross-border payment spaces, they are, micro retail remittance payments by comparison. So they are smaller and more efficient. In terms of experiments going on in the marketplace right now, man, it is massive. There's a lot of stuff going on in Bitcoin. There's a lot of stuff going on in Ethereum. There's people building really cool stuff. Even myself, in my private time, I build on top of XRP. Like, I don't know, I could go on for days on these. I just don't think anybody has gotten to the network scale piece where you have a self-sustaining network yet outside of Ripple and RippleNet.
Great. And this next question is from an anonymous attendee, so it may be one of your coworkers, because the question is, of all the things you're working on now at Ripple, what are you most excited about?
Oh man. Well, the thing that I'm most excited about working at Ripple is building networks. I'm really excited about the underlying digital asset, but really building networks on top of a digital asset like XRP, whether those networks are for cross-border payments or anything else, that's really rewarding because, I mean, I'll be honest, the first couple of years were super hard, super hard, and it wasn't quite sure if we were ever going to get to that, phase two of the scale. But once you put the hard work in and a lot of things go your way, to actually see the network kind of organically grow on its own, where new connections are taking place and the transaction numbers are just up and to the right, that's incredibly valuable. So building networks is my answer, without giving too much away.
Awesome. And we'll give everyone a minute to see if there's any more questions. That's all of them for now. And I want to thank everyone
Cool.
again for attending and thank Craig. I'll just vamp for a second in case there's any more that come through. But, it's exciting to hear you talk about this now because we've been doing our, Product Talk podcast, and we have one series that's on AI. And so we just had the former Tinder CPO talking about like where everything is now versus 10 years ago. And this is like kind of that next frontier when we look 10 years ahead, and it's going to be like, of course, that's what we're doing with blockchain and everything that's happening. So it's exciting, and I hope everyone enjoyed this presentation. And we don't have any more questions. So I'll
Awesome.
thank Craig again for this incredible and informative presentation, and thanks to all of you for spending some time with us this evening or tomorrow, in one case from our attendee from Vietnam. And yeah, thanks everyone. Be sure to check in with our future webinars. They're most Wednesdays. We've got some really great ones coming up. We've got Pure Storage as VP of Product on a matter of product metrics. We've got the Retail Me Not CPO on product strategy fundamentals, and Diversis CEO on entrepreneurial lessons from building software at a startup. All these and more in August, and we'll hope to see you guys there or on our blog, on social media. Hit up Craig on social media if you've got more blockchain questions that you didn't get a chance to ask tonight. And thanks again, everybody, and thanks to our sponsors at Amplitude for letting this all happen tonight. Take
Thank you.
care.